Is America heading for a recession? America is the largest economy in the world. If American economy goes down, it will cause tremors around the globe, and produce an adverse impact on the world's growth rate. So, obviously, everybody has this huge question in mind. Is America heading towards a recession? Before we answer that, we need to know, what is a recession? A recession is defined as a decline in economic growth. To be more accurate, economists define recession as 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline. This occurs when the GDP falls in comparison to the previous quarter. Many economists are predicting a recession in America, starting sometime in 2023. Only a smaller section of economists believe things are going to be just fine, and that number is going down every passing day. Why do most economists believe that a recession in America is around the corner? The number one threat for a possible recession is the growing rate of inflation, or the increase in price. The Federal Reserve Bank's target inflation rate is 2%. The US has been able to maintain around that target rate for more than a couple of decades, until early 2021, but the inflation rate hit its peak of 8.5% in March 2022, and has stayed high since then. This level of inflation is the highest in the past 40 years, last seen only in December 1981, during the first year of Ronald Reagan's presidency. Now, it begs a simple question. Why did the inflation become so high? When the pandemic started in 2020, stringent lockdown was observed in many states, to stop the spread of COVID-19, as per advice given by the medical fraternity. Some states like California, New Jersey, and New York implemented longer periods of such lockdowns, and some others like Texas and Florida managed it with far shorter period, though it was controversial then. The economy suffered heavily during the period of these lockdowns. To compensate for the losses to both the businesses and the unemployed, massive amount of money was pumped in by the federal government, with acts like Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. I know you have a question in mind. Where did the US find this money to spend, when their revenue had come to a grinding halt, due to the lockdown? The US government in fact, spent over $7 trillion above the revenue they collected, in the years 2020 and 2021, by incurring huge debt, and servicing the debt by printing money, left, right and center. Of course, the economists have a fancy word for printing money, called quantitative easing, abbreviated as QE. QE is a means of buying the debt created by the US government, as well as buying other assets, to increase economic activity. Though QE can create money, it cannot create products. So, now, you have limited supply of products, but quite a bit of money in the system. Guess what? This causes increase in demand, and the price for the products go up, resulting in inflation. The next reason why inflation happened was due to a tight labor market, or shortage of labor. The latest US unemployment rate has hit a low of 3.6%. Millions of people who were employed in 2020, before the lockdown was imposed, didn't return to the labor market when the lockdown was completely lifted, either because of the stimulus checks provided to them, gave them cash reserve, or due to other reasons. The labor shortage meant the businesses have to pay higher wages and salary to recruit new employees, as well as train them. The additional costs to the businesses always get transferred to the consumers, resulting in inflation. The COVID pandemic has caused huge losses, in terms of lives and property, as well as physical and psychological damage. Added to all this, it caused a huge supply chain issue. In a globalized world, where waves of the disease spread were happening at different time periods, supplies of some component or other became unavailable, and finished goods shipment faced a lot of delays. There were also port congestion when the ships arrived simultaneously with imported items from around the world. The Los Angeles port, for instance, had to face an unprecedented high ship traffic congestion, and port customs and clearance became a real headache. Again, when the shipments caused shortage for all kinds of products, the supply shortage created a price increase, adding to the inflation. When things seemed to be coming to some level of control, two unexpected things happened, upending the world economy once again. First, the number of COVID cases in China started going up, starting from the second half of 2021, but the larger record outbreaks started happening from February 2022 onwards. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has enforced a policy known as zero-COVID strategy, which severely limits people's movement, and this policy has been implemented in many major cities, affecting 40% of the Chinese population directly. The large metropolis of Shanghai was the worst hit, with their ports having to literally close down, for several days. As we all know, China is the manufacturing hub of the world, and Shanghai port is the gateway for the shipments of these products. When Shanghai port experienced delays and shutdowns, the supply chain issues of the world only got tighter and tighter. No prize for guessing this had a direct impact on inflation. Another major cause of concern was the Ukraine invasion by Russia. America has been getting satellite data of a possible Russian invasion, but the US and NATO did nothing to prevent the war, either by deterrence, or going in for a negotiation. Instead, the war in Ukraine started in February 2022, which made the Western powers levy heavy economic sanctions on Russia. But, the European nations depend heavily on Russian gas and oil, and the supply restrictions has only created a price increase in global oil. The subsequent inflation has affected nations all over the globe, including the USA. And that's why we have this inflation. But inflation is no joke. Inflation has a direct impact on the lives of ordinary people. You may wonder, what is the US government doing to address this inflation threat? This is where the US central bank, Federal Reserve, steps in. The primary tool used by the Federal Reserve to bring down inflation is to raise interest rates. Due to the pandemic, countries around the world have held interest rates very low, and the Federal Reserve has kept it close to 0%. The Federal Reserve has promised that they'll handle the inflation by raising the interest rates, until they see that the inflation has reduced. During the last time when high inflation occurred in the US, the Federal Reserve chairman was Paul Volcker. And he is a hero to many, since he brought down the record inflation of the US, by raising the interest rates higher and higher. The current Federal Reserve chairman, Jerome Powell, seems to be a fan of Paul Volcker, based on his testimony to the US Congress. Powell is not in the same position as Volcker, in terms of the quantum of inflation faced by the US. There was runaway inflation, consistently in the double digits, back in the 1970s, and in the beginning of the 1980s. There may not be a necessity to increase the interest rates as drastically as what Paul Volcker did, when he raised a key short-term interest rate to nearly 20%, leading to a high level of unemployment of 11%. The current Fed Chairman Powell seems to be committed to raise the interest rates until he finds the inflation getting under control. And now comes the answer to our question: if America is getting into a recession. If interest rates go up, the borrowing costs of businesses will go up, resulting in severe constraints on their profits, and their potential to do acquisitions or increased business development. That should explain why the stock market has been on the downward trend for a while. The downfall in the US stock market has caused losses of over $7 trillion in the first 4 months of 2022. When people believe that their stock portfolio is worth lesser, pessimism develops, reducing their spending patterns. This reduced economic activity is what results in a downward GDP, or recession. The US government has always wanted the Federal Reserve to act cautiously, while increasing interest rates. In fact, the pressure applied on the Federal Reserve by the government has made them react much slower, making several economic pundits question the independence of the Federal Reserve. The US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, has warned the Federal Reserve that aggressive interest rate hikes will lead to a situation called stagflation, a term coined by combining stagnation and inflation. Stagflation will be the worst outcome, because the inflation wouldn't have come down, but would have only caused decrease in economic activity, due to increased interest rates. So, is there anything else that the Biden administration can do on this issue? It can reverse its tighter restriction on the oil industry, and let domestic oil production to grow, for which there will be a political cost to pay. Simultaneously, the Biden administration can play an active role in bringing the Russia-Ukraine war to an end. Currently, the US has taken a hardline stance against Russia, but it doesn't seem to have helped much. An end to the war, for the sake of the millions who are affected by it, requires better diplomacy than what has been pursued so far. In simple terms, recession can't be prevented by a president, or the US Congress, easily. Currently, a soft landing is what the Federal Reserve is hoping for. Soft landing is a term used for reduced inflation, at the cost of GDP growth, but without causing heavy unemployment. Thanks for watching.